Okay. I feel a little bit like an imposter up here because that end of the table have some direct spiritual knowledge that they can really impart to you. And this half of the table are the clinicians who are dealing with the nuts and bolts of the research. They don't have answers, I have questions. But the one question that people, NDEers, ask me the most, because I'm a doctor, I'm not a spiritual teacher, is how can I convince my doctor, my wife, my father, that I'm not crazy? And because I'm a psychiatrist, I know that's a code for how can you convince me I'm not crazy? I've been teaching doctors, nurses, hospital chaplains for a long time about near-death experiences and given a lot of thought to how do we teach them to differentiate spiritual experiences from mental illness. And a lot of other people have written about this. And a few years ago, I gave a talk at Assist where we listed, I think, around 30 or 40 differences between mental illness and spiritual experiences. There was a clear-cut difference. And that was eventually published in the Journal of Near-Death Studies. But it comes down to one thing. I won't go through all the 30 differences, but it comes down to one thing. And someone important said this 2,000 years ago. By their fruits shall you know them. Mental illness, particularly psychosis, which NDEs are often confused with, leave people more inwardly focused, more frightened, more afraid of the world, afraid of living as well as dying, more concerned with their own safety, whereas NDEs make people more outwardly focused, more altruistic, more full of love and enjoying life. In basic, when you get right down to it, the mental illness makes people less alive, makes them withdraw from life. And NDEs make you more engaged in life. And that is the major difference.
Gosh. That was beautiful, Bruce. And so in fairness, I did tell these people up here that I was going to ask them the question that he just answered. And that is, what's the number one question people ask you when you are off stage, are separate and apart, or what's the most interesting question that you're ever asked? So number one, or most interesting question.
But I'm ready to answer the other question.
I don't know what I'm going to answer.
And that question was, what do you hope people take away from this?
Yes.
And so I'm sitting here just feeling the answer come in. And that is, I remember when my stepdaughter was killed, and that was the worst thing we could ever imagine. That, you know, that only happens to other people, and it's devastating. But what that has turned into is something so beautiful. If you saw my talk this morning, it's transformational, these challenges we go through in life. And I can remember at one point asking, does someone have to die before we get this? Before we understand why we're here and who we are? And this is what I want you to take away. The answer is no. Somebody doesn't have to die, and you don't have to die. You don't have to have a near-death experience, and you don't have to go through tragedy. But unfortunately, many people need a wake-up call. But the mere fact that you're here now shows that your soul's already talking to you. So you'll learn so many tools here this week, and just pay attention. And when I say that, I'm hearing, elaborate on that. The spirit world speaks so subtly. People think it has to have bells and whistles and loud voices. No, it's these little things that snag your attention. So when something snags you, pay attention, pull the thread, and ask, knowing there are higher voices talking to you right now. That's what I want you to take away, that heaven is here, the connection is here. You don't have to die first.
Beautifully put. I'm going to answer all the questions. No, actually, I was going to point out, Bruce was indicating he would, as the researcher had the questions and we had the answers, but I promise you, my best days these days are just having better questions. I don't pretend to have answers, but I know where the questions are leading, and that actually is worth a lot. And so I'd like to just briefly offer to add to what has already been said. For one thing, yes, we often make the point that just by being a sentient, conscious being, okay, but that there is a tremendous change coming to this world, and as an experiencer who also has a lifetime spent in science, for me this is really all about kind of the science of understanding. Now there's another powerful tool, and that of course is personal experience. And that's why Karen and I do so much work with Sacred Acoustics and trying to get kind of experience out there with the kind of tools that can enable people to do it. But the only thing you really need is your consciousness. And this whole world is, I think it was Ken Ring who did some of the research to show how influential just knowing about NDEs can be. And something that I'll certainly be covering in my plenary tomorrow morning is how the entire world is actually undergoing tremendous shift. It has to do with the science of consciousness, but the tip of the spear is the NDE community. And I'll also explain why that is no accident and why the universe has upped its game tremendously in the last 5 decades, because it is time for us to awaken. And all the clues to that awakening really come from this group and the kind of efforts of people around the world who have a similar interest in sharing our spiritual nature and that we're spiritual beings. And there's no way to make sense of it scientifically or philosophically or personally unless we come to develop that much richer relationship with the universe that is our birthright as sentient beings. So this is all about that awakening, which I think is inevitable. And it's all thanks to the people in this room. Thank you all very much for being part of it.
Now, I'm going to try to take the questions that you've given up here, and some of them are individualized, as you know, and some of them are meant to be for everybody. So I'm going to start with Bruce, one that was addressed to him.
This question says, psychedelics have been used for psychotherapy, such as addictions and depression, and also to induce spiritually transformative experiences, such as feeling profound love. Do you see advantages and problems with this approach? Yes. I think the key to this question is that it says they've been used for psychotherapy, not for recreation. Psychedelics certainly can be very powerful. There are a lot of advantages and a lot of risks to taking it on your own. Most of the places that are doing research with spiritual experiences, the word they use is occasioned by psychedelics, they don't want to say caused, are done in a very controlled environment where you have a therapist with you for the entire duration of the trip, helping guide you through the experience. And in that context, it can be helpful. Having said that, it is not a shortcut to anything. Let me tell you a couple of anecdotes. Carl Jansen, who was a neuroscientist, neuropsychiatrist in London at the Maudsley Clinic, did research for 12 years on ketamine, which is an anesthetic, to induce mystical experiences. And he developed a very elaborate model of how this affects the NMA receptor in the brain, and that's why you have this experience. And he wrote about this in very erudite ways for about 12 years until he had his own NDE, which was not under the influence of drugs. And what he said was that he learned that ketamine does not cause the experience. It's a door that opens it up to you. And that is the advantage of psychedelics. In the last few years, the few labs that are doing research on psychedelics at Johns Hopkins University, at Imperial College in London, have done neuroimaging. They expected to find certain parts of the brain that are excited by these psychedelics to cause hallucinations. And what they found, every one of them, was that the psychedelics shut down the brain. Turn off the filter so that you have access to these other realities. So what do you do with this? Alan Watts, who was one of the great psychedelic researchers of the 60s, at one point in his life, after he wrote his great book, gosh, I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, Alan Watts' great book. After he wrote that, he stopped doing drugs. And people who were his followers said, "Why? Why'd you stop?" And he said, "It's like a telephone. Once you've got the message, you hang up."
Suzanne, your question?
Okay, the question is, Suzanne, what do you do when you meditate? And I find that kind of funny because it's not about doing, it's about being. I began meditating to connect with my stepdaughter. That was my whole goal, and I knew that I had to quiet the mind. So there was a period of a couple years where I really did the standard practice of noticing the thoughts that come in, just noticing them and letting them flow through. So that was your basic learning to still the mind. And then I trained myself to enter into an alpha brainwave state and then a theta brainwave state at will, not realizing how beneficial that would become in my work as a medium, which when I began meditating, I didn't know I would become. So that meditative practice now, I can just easily go into an expanded state of awareness, and then the doing is just connecting with my team of guides and either waiting to see what they have to share with me or asking a question. So it's really, my meditations are not quiet. They're a time of connecting with higher consciousness and a time of reminding myself there's so much more than this world, which is so important. To me, it has to be a daily practice or you just get sucked into the drama if you're not careful. So it's a sacred time for me, and I just, without fail, spend that time. There's a period of silence every time, just being, but then it's an active conversation, and I just love teaching people how to get to that state. I want everybody to have that experience.
And I have a question. Do you still consider yourself a Christian? Question mark. Difficulties with that? Question mark. I think it's important to point out one of the what I consider fundamental lessons of my NDE was coming back to this world and realizing that force of love that I encountered deep in the core realm, and in fact identified with as one with that kind of God force of pure healing love, that force loves Christians and Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and Shintoists and Zoroastrians and atheists and bloggers. I mean, that God loves all comers. And to realize that, in fact, the deep message of the prophets, whether you're talking about the Buddha or Christ, Muhammad, it's always about love and mercy and compassion. Although I will say, from my point of view, I believe Christ was the ultimate in delivering that message to this world in very profound form 2,000 years ago. And not only that, but also the message that the answers lie within us all, and that we are one with God. And he was trying to give us that incredibly empowering message that I think is totally consistent with modern NDEs, and often make that point. But another thing that's so important to understand, and this was crystal clear to me when I came back to this world, is that there was no way to explain that infinitely loving God, all-powerful, all-knowing, without also realizing that reincarnation had to be part of the picture. And reincarnation was shown to me very strongly in major form in the midst of my journey. Once is this beautiful tapestry that showed life reviews and all of our experiences together, but all in this process of growth towards oneness with the divine. The other strong image was really one of flying fish. It was amazingly beautiful, but showed us all together kind of down here, dumbed down, not knowing all that our higher souls know when we're living these lives, because we do that intentionally. That's how we learn and teach these lessons of love and compassion and forgiveness in this world. But it gets very confusing if you buy into the Orthodox Christian view of one incarnation, then eternal heaven or hell. So I won't get into a big religious, philosophical, theological discussion about it. although I'm prepared to do that with anyone who wishes. But the bottom line is that by and I would say that reincarnation is fully consistent with original Christianity. I mean, Christ talked about John the Baptist being a reincarnated prophet from an earlier age. So, but it was Constantine who said, uh-oh, that is far too liberating for the individual soul. And they were trying to design Christianity for control purposes. And so once we realize, and of course then the work from Dobbs, the scientific work on reincarnation is so overwhelming. More than 2,500 cases that give you strong reason to believe that we may come back again and again. So from my point of view, you could say I'm a Christian, but no, really we're all part of one loving, infinitely powerful God that is merciful, and that we're all in this together as one with that deity. So I would say it's consistent with original Christianity, but a much bigger message that's all-inclusive. And I know Bob Copps is in this audience. I often recommend his beautiful book on the influence of NDEs on religion, what they should be. Our religion should shift dramatically to reflect this new message of profound love and healing possibilities for the universe, all through the NDE community and what it teaches us about the nature of reality.
Okay, so when we decided to do this, I had no idea how this would go, but so far, Eben wins because he answered about 5 questions in this pile. One of them was about reincarnation. Eben, thank you very much. And I won't go on and on about that, but so far he's the winner. And I will ask you, too, if all 3 of you want to say anything about animals, because he opened the door. But people want to know about animals and...
I didn't know it was a competition. So let's see. Pets in the afterlife? I guarantee it. And this is so comforting because we have a couple older dogs. And it would be a horrible heaven if our pets weren't in it. But I can tell you as an evidential medium, I have had pets come through with evidence that their souls survived because they are our souls just as well as we are. And they will let you know that they are just fine like our loved ones are. I'm not going to share all kinds of evidential stories, but I'm just being told real quickly. Just when I'm talking about evidence from pets, I've had cats tell me that my mom has me right there in a box. It's a paw print. They made my paw print, and my client on the screen holds up a box and shows me the paw print in it. And you could say, well, maybe you're just reading her mind, and then the cat tells you other things that she doesn't even know about and come to light later, just like people, because it's all consciousness. So, and it's love. And so that connection never dies.
Did you want to say anything else about animals before I pass this to Bruce?
Yeah, it's important to point out, we humans, especially looking back on the scientific revolution the last 400 years and all of this, we tend to call this our dominant hemisphere because of this little voice in our head. And yes, it's useful for a rational, logical discussion, but in fact, it gets in the way of our deeper spiritual abilities. And I would say animals have that advantage, is they don't have this little voice of rational reason in there kind of trying to pretend that they're separate from the universe in any way. For me, it's crystal clear. I mean, I saw animals in my NDE very profoundly. And it's really led me to point out to people that what separates humans from animals is not our language and all that capability. It actually can be our detriment in ways, especially the voice of our ego. But we can be very proud of the fact that we cook. That's what makes us different.
Okay. Should I say, Bruce, top that?
No. Should I go to one of these? Okay. Before I go to the next question, I want to say that I just thought of the name of Alan Watts' book. The reason I couldn't think of it is the book is called The Book. So the next question is about people doing research on life reviews during NDEs. Actually, there has been a lot of research on this. Russ Noyes, a psychiatrist at the University of Iowa, wrote several papers about life review. He called it the panoramic memory. He was writing really before Raymond Moody published his book. So they weren't calling them NDEs. But he wrote about panoramic memory during sudden brushes with death. At the University of Virginia, where we are, Emily Kelly has written some impressive papers on a life review after NDEs. What's interested me most about the life review are the empathic ones that we call empathic ones, in which you experience the past life elements not only from your own perspective but from someone else's. And this is very common in NDEs. And most often, the things you remember are things where you have hurt somebody else, and you feel the pain from their perspective. This can be emotional or very graphically physical in sometimes, which give you a sense of tremendous compassion you didn't have before when you realized this. But I've also heard people who have been abused reliving in the life review the abuse and feeling it from the abuser's perspective, which gives them tremendous understanding and compassion for the abuser. So it works both ways.
Okay, another question that I'm going to ask all of these folks up here, and I'll also include myself, was some people want to know about our youth and how are we reaching out to our younger generation. And so while they think about it, I'll tell you that in terms of the board, the IANDS, etc., we are trying in every way we can, let's just say regionally, in every little group and so on, to try to reach out in communities to the youth. And we can see here across the room, I don't know what you want to consider youth, but I'll just say that in terms of a lot younger people, we want to address that in our conferences in the future, having some things that will attract youth. So I'll just say from that level, please let us know your ideas about reaching out to the younger folks. And then I'll ask each individual here to say how you're reaching out to youth and how we could.
I have a lot of people who attend my workshops and classes who want to bring their children with them, or their grandchildren are spontaneously opening up to experiences. So I feel that the younger generation is more consciously awake naturally. So I just see it happening. It's unfolding. I'm not doing anything actively other than observing it and then helping to nurture that as I see it.
Well, a lot of the work that Karen Newell, my partner, and I, and co-author of Living in a Mindful Universe, do is really about getting meditation out there to young folks. And of course, we're trying to get it to other audiences too, get it into prisons, but getting it into schools. And getting people started at a very early age with mindfulness and kind of focusing on their inner world and realizing how the outer world begins to reflect your inner world. So the more you can properly manage and kind of balance your inner world, the better your life becomes. And for the years that I've been doing this, since my NDE, the decade or so, I must say there have been times when I was kind of frustrated that most of the people in the room were kind of older, getting towards Medicare and all those kind of things, and yet not as much of the young folks. Although I must say, in recent years, we're seeing an increase in some of the younger folks attending. I've given talks to colleges, even down to 7th grade level. Also participated in a number of school projects where I would Skype in to a class discussion on NDEs because they do have quite an interest in it. But from my point of view, we really, I want to personally do a lot more to engage the youth of this world, because I think that's how you really change the world. And many of them luckily do have a big interest in it. So we'll just keep pushing.
And I want to thank Eben for that. In terms of opening the door for me to say, I'm now a professor in clinical arena now with nurses, and I can tell you I'm so awed at how many younger people, 20, 25 years old, are so taken by the idea of the near-death experience. And so when people ask me, either in the school, I do clinical nursing, mostly intensive care, and also palliative and hospice as well. But whenever people ask me, do you really believe in that? I mean, seriously, do you really believe that? One of the things I have to say every time is children have taught me the most. And an example is the PDICU nurses called me to their unit one day and said, we got this little guy, he's 3.5 years old, and he had one of those, you know. Yeah, I know. And so I went to the unit of the ICU, of course, and so I walked into the little boy's room, and all the nurses are staring at me. They're all very young. And so I asked the little boy, so what happened to you? I did not run across the street. I did not run across the street. And I don't know where we're going with the conversation. So I said, okay, so what happened? He goes, I did not run across the street. When that white man hit me, I was fine. I had my pizza. I did not run across the street. I was fine. And I said, okay, I have no idea what that means, what he just told me. And so I said, well, then what happened? He said, he told me I have to go away. He told me I had to go away. And I said, who told you you had to go away? Silence. Did he tell you anything else? Yeah. What else did he tell you? He told me, look at the straw. And I said, he told you to look at the straw? Yeah. Did you look at the straw? Yeah. That's a conversation for a child. Y'all know that. Yeah. Well, help me, child. What was in the straw? My mommy was crying and crying next to the fireman man. Now, all the nurses are listening, of course me. And I said, okay, now y'all must know that fireman man in my language is called a paramedic. Mm-hmm. And the straw, I don't have a clue what that means, but at the end of the straw was his mommy crying and crying. Now, y'all know what I know. But what I found out in the real story is this little boy was running across the H-E-B parking lot, which is a grocery store in San Antonio, and he had his pizza. Yes, he did. And he ran across the parking lot, and the white pickup truck driven by a man hit him. He told me the white man. That's what he said. When the white pickup truck driven by the man hit him, and all of a sudden, 2 groups of paramedics came. They were taking care of that little body in the parking lot, and his mommy was next to him, crying and crying. Now, I'm here to tell you I believe all of that, because if you look, and Bruce can correct me on anything I'm saying, but if you look at No Human Wants or Needs, many people look in the darkness or in the tunnel, etc. That little boy told me all his words. He didn't read no books. He didn't see no movies. He just knew what happened to him. And so that's one of the ways I'm reaching out, is to have other people pay attention, like all us nurses, and the younger ones especially, to know that those little people tell the truth. So, Bruce.
Well, I think you're now the champion in that sense. Well, I have no particular insight as to how to reach the younger folks, but I know that's a big concern for all of us. So if any of you have suggestions, we'd love to hear them. But I do want to echo something that the other people have already said, and that's that the next generation is starting off much ahead of where we were. I've been teaching medical students for about half a century now, and I've seen a tremendous change over the years. I don't know whether it's something biological with the new generation or whether it's just the culture is changing. But the medical students I'm seeing now gobble this stuff up. No matter how skeptical their mentors are, the senior psychiatrists are, the senior physicians are, the medical students know about this, they want to hear more about it, and they want to use that in their practices.
Okay, we got to wrap it up. All right, so we know it's time to start wrapping it up, unfortunately, but I have to pay attention because I do that sign thing down there. So I'm going to ask each panelist to say anything else that they would like to say that nobody's asked, including me. And if they want to go back to one of the questions that's already been asked. So, Suzanne, what are you going to say?
I want to say we're going to let Eben go first.
All right. Good move. Yeah, I think the important thing to understand here is this world is shifting very dramatically, and Bruce alluded to it minutes ago, but from my point of view, it is really about the evolution of consciousness. And materialist science and its false sense of separation has led to a lot of conflict in this world, and a lot of kind of people feeling detached and not really connected. And I think that this whole movement is a tremendous gift for all souls involved, because it's really one of bringing us all together. We're here to take care of each other and really show and live a life of love, compassion, forgiveness. And I believe that much of this apparent polarization and friction we see in our world today will very rapidly evaporate as this awakening comes, as people realize through both personal experience and through kind of the science supporting the reality of all this, that these beautiful journeys are a gift that we can all learn lessons from and take seriously, and it will lead to far more harmony, peace, and resonance in this world, and love for all. And the interesting thing is, in many ways, it's being led by the science, because that is an objective form of agreement on the nature of the workings of the universe. And as we mature beyond the kind of simplistic falsehoods of scientific materialism and much more into a world that deals more effectively with quantum physics and the deep lessons there, and takes these kind of journeys seriously, that to me is really the destiny of humanity, which we are finally getting at after 5,000 years of flailing about. So, welcome.
I'd just like to leave everybody with the thought that so many people say, what is the spiritual journey all about? And you compare your journey to other people's journey. Where you are right now is so perfect, and you'll see the perfection of it as you move forward. The best part that I've found is that the journey just keeps getting better. It's so wonderful to wake up in the morning and say, once you know how to connect, what's going to happen today? So how do you learn to connect? Just keep listening, going to conferences like this, but asking for guidance. Show me who I am. Show me what to do next. Once you really come to know who you are as a soul in human form, and you realize that dual nature, you can shift your focus just like that. And that is the journey. The journey is going from thinking you are only human to knowing you're both human and a spirit. And I look back at the past and think, how do we survive without knowing that? And it's tough, isn't it? But once you realize there's another whole aspect of you that you can tap into at any time, it changes everything. So if you haven't felt that yet, just start asking, show me, who am I? And then just buckle your seatbelt.
That's so sweet.
That was such a perfect note to end on. I only have one more thing I want to say, and that is thank you. Eben talked about how important it is that the science is now progressing to the point where we can look at this. But I want to say that the science rests on the raw data that comes from you. If it weren't for you, there wouldn't be science. So thank you all.